Maya had always been the type of person who said yes when others needed help. That's probably why she ended up working at the post office in the first place. 3 years ago, when her mom got sick and the medical bills started piling up, Maya took the first steady job she could find. The pay wasn't amazing, but it was reliable, and the people in her small town knew her face. She never imagined she'd be driving through a snowstorm in the middle of December, but here she was. Her supervisor, Mrs. Rodriguez, had asked her that morning if she could cover the mountain route. The regular guy, Frank, had called in sick with the flu, and there were packages that absolutely had to be delivered before Christmas. "It's just light snow in the forecast," Mrs. Rodriguez had said, pointing to the weather report on her computer screen. "Should be fine with your truck." Maya looked at her four-wheel drive pickup sitting in the parking lot. It was old but reliable, and she'd driven it through plenty of bad weather before. Plus, the overtime pay would really help. Her mom's physical therapy sessions were expensive, and Christmas was coming. "Sure, I can do it," Maya had said, grabbing the keys in the stack of packages. That was 6 hours ago. Now, as she gripped the steering wheel and squinted through the windshield, Maya was starting to wonder if she'd made a huge mistake. What had started as a few gentle snowflakes around noon had turned into something much worse. The wind was howling, and the snow was coming down so thick she could barely see 10 feet ahead of her truck. The mountain road twisted and turned like a snake, and every curve felt dangerous. Maya had grown up in Colorado, so she knew how to drive in snow, but this was different. This felt angry. The weather seemed to have a personal grudge against anyone stupid enough to be out in it. Her GPS kept cutting in and out, the signal blocked by the thick clouds and heavy snow. She'd passed the last real house about an hour ago, and now she was deep in the wilderness, surrounded by tall pine trees that looked like dark shadows in the storm. Maya checked her phone again. No signal, of course. She had 3 more deliveries to make, all to cabins scattered throughout Pine Valley. The first address was supposed to be coming up soon, according to her map, but everything looked the same now, white, endless white. The truck's heater was working overtime, but Maya could still feel the cold creeping in around the edges of the windows. Her hands were getting stiff, even with gloves on. She reached over to turn up the heat, and that's when it happened. The road curved sharply to the left, but Maya saw it too late. The truck's wheels hit a patch of ice hidden under the fresh snow, and suddenly she wasn't steering anymore. The truck was steering itself, sliding sideways across the narrow mountain road. "No, no, no," Maya whispered, trying to turn into the skid like her dad had taught her years ago, but it was too late. The truck slid off the road and down a small embankment, coming to rest with its front end buried deep in a snowbank. The engine died with a sad little cough. Maya sat there for a moment, her heart pounding. She was okay, she realized. Shaken up, but not hurt. The truck, however, was clearly not going anywhere. Snow was piled up over the hood, and she could tell. Just by looking that the wheels were buried deep, she tried starting the engine. It turned over a few times, then gave up completely. The battery was getting weak from the cold. Maya pulled out her phone again, hoping against hope that she might have gotten a signal. Nothing, just a little no-service message mocking her from the screen. She looked at her watch. 3:30 in the afternoon, and it was already getting darker. In December, in the mountains, darkness came early and fast. She probably had maybe 2 hours of daylight left if she was lucky. The smart thing to do would be to stay with the truck. That's what they always said in survival shows. Stay with your vehicle, keep the engine running for heat, wait for help. But who was going to help her? Nobody else was crazy enough to be out in this weather, and nobody even knew where she was. Mrs. Rodriguez knew she was doing the mountain route, but that covered about 50 square miles of wilderness. Maya looked at the packages in the back seat. Mrs. Henderson was expecting her heart medication. The Johnsons were waiting for their grandson's Christmas present. Old Mr. Peterson lived alone and probably hadn't seen another human being in weeks. She couldn't just sit here. Maya grabbed her emergency backpack from behind the seat. She'd learned to keep it stocked after getting stuck in a minor snowstorm last winter. Flashlight, extra batteries, emergency blanket, some energy bars, a thermos of coffee that was probably still warm. She also grabbed the most important packages, the ones that absolutely had to be delivered. The wind hit her like a slap in the face when she opened the truck door. It was bitter cold, the kind that made your eyes water instantly and seemed to cut right through your jacket. Maya pulled her hat down over her ears and started walking. The snow was deeper than she'd expected. With every step, she sank in almost to her knees. It was like walking through wet cement, exhausting and slow. The packages in her backpack felt like they weighed 100 pounds each. Maya tried to follow the road, but it was hard to tell where the road ended and the forest began. Everything was white, and the blowing snow made it even harder to see. She kept stumbling over hidden rocks and branches buried under the snow dot. After about 20 minutes of walking, Maya was already exhausted. Her legs burned from fighting through the deep snow, and her lungs hurt from breathing the cold air. Sweat was starting to freeze on her face despite the bitter temperature. That's when she saw it. Just a tiny wisp of smoke, barely visible through the storm, but definitely there. Smoke meant fire, and fire meant people. Maya changed direction, leaving the road behind and pushing into the forest toward that precious gray line rising into the white sky. The trees gave her some protection from the wind, but they also made it darker. The snow wasn't as deep under the pine branches, but there were fallen logs and rocks hidden everywhere. Maya tripped and fell twice, both times getting a face full of snow that melted and ran down her neck. The smoke was getting thicker now, which meant she was getting closer. Maya pushed herself harder, even though her legs felt like rubber and her chest was burning. The packages bounced against her back with every step. Then she saw it through the trees. A cabin, with warm yellow light glowing in the windows and smoke rising steadily from a stone chimney. It looked like something from a Christmas card, peaceful and welcoming in the middle of the storm. Maya stumbled toward it, but her body had finally reached its limit. The cold, the exhaustion, the stress of the crash, it all hit her at once. Her legs gave out about 50 yards from the cabin, and she fell face first into the snow. She tried to get up, but her muscles wouldn't cooperate. Everything felt heavy. And far away, Maya knew she was in trouble, real trouble. This was how people died in the mountains, alone and frozen, just yards away from safety. "Help!" she called out, but her voice was weak, and the wind scattered it away. "Please, somebody. Help me." The warm lights of the cabin seemed to be getting dimmer, or maybe that was just her vision fading. Maya closed her eyes and tried to call out again, but she wasn't sure if any sound came out at all. The last thing she remembered before everything went dark was the sound of heavy footsteps crunching through the snow, getting closer and closer. Jake Mitchell had been chopping wood when he first heard the sound. At least, he thought he heard something. Living alone in the mountains for 2 years had taught him that the wind could play tricks on your ears, especially during a storm like this one. He stopped swinging his axe and listened. Nothing but the howling of wind through the pine trees and the soft thud of snow hitting the ground. Jake shook his head and went back to splitting logs. Winter was coming hard this year, and he needed to make sure he had enough firewood to last through the cold months. Jake had moved to his grandfather's old cabin after his divorce. The whole thing had been messy, painful, and expensive. His ex-wife got the house in town, most of their friends, and half of everything else. Jake got the cabin that nobody wanted, the one that was too far from civilization and completely impractical for modern living. Turned out that's exactly what he needed. The cabin wasn't much to look at from the outside. Just a simple log structure with a metal roof and a stone chimney that his grandfather had built with his own hands back in the 1960s, but it was solid, warm, and quiet. Most importantly, it was his. Jake made his living as a timber assessor, which was a fancy way of saying he walked through forests and decided which trees were ready to be cut down. It was perfect work for someone who wanted to be alone. He could spend days in the woods without seeing another person, just him and the trees and the wildlife. Most people thought he was crazy for living this way. His sister called every few weeks to ask when he was coming back to the real world. His friends from his construction days had stopped calling altogether. But Jake didn't mind. After 20 years of dealing with people, deadlines, and drama, the silence was like medicine. The wind picked up again, rattling the windows of the cabin. Jake looked up at the sky and frowned. This storm was getting worse than the weather report had predicted. The snow was coming down thick and fast, and the temperature was dropping quickly. He gathered up an armload of the wood he'd just split and headed for the cabin door. That's when he heard it again. This time, he was sure it wasn't the wind. "Help?" The voice was faint, almost lost in the storm, but it was definitely human. And it sounded like it was in trouble. Jake dropped the firewood and stood perfectly still, listening. For a moment, there was nothing but the storm. Then he heard it again. "Please, somebody help me." The voice was closer now, but weaker. Jake grabbed his heavy winter coat from the hook by the door and pulled it on. He took his big flashlight from the shelf and stepped out into the storm. The cold hit him like a punch in the face. Jake had lived in Colorado his whole life, but this was brutal even by mountain standards. The wind was strong enough to knock a person over, and the snow was so thick it was like trying to see through a white curtain. "Hello?" Jake called out. "Where are you?" He listened, trying to figure out which direction the voice had come from. The wind was making it hard to tell, but he thought it might be coming from the forest on the south side of his property. Jake started walking in that direction, sweeping his flashlight back and forth. The beam didn't penetrate very far through the falling snow, but it was better than nothing. He called out again. "Keep talking. I'm coming to help you." He heard a weak response, but couldn't make out the words. Jake picked up his pace, following the sound. His boots crunched through snow that was already more than a foot deep and getting deeper by the minute. Then his flashlight beam caught something that didn't belong. A splash of bright blue against all the white. Jake hurried toward it and found a person lying face down in the snow about 50 yards from his cabin. It was a woman, wearing a blue Postal Service jacket and a backpack. She wasn't moving. Jake's construction background had taught him basic first aid, and he knew the signs of hypothermia when he saw them. This woman was in serious trouble. Her lips were blue, she was shivering uncontrollably, and she seemed barely conscious. "Hey, can you hear me?" Jake said, kneeling down beside her. "You're going to be okay. I'm going to get you inside." The woman's eyes fluttered open. They were unfocused, but she was alive. She tried to say something, but her teeth were chattering too hard to understand. Jake didn't waste time asking questions. He slipped his arms under her and lifted her up. She was lighter than he expected, but carrying someone through deep snow while fighting against the wind was still hard work. The woman's head rolled against his shoulder, and he could feel how cold she was even through their winter clothes. The 50 yards back to his cabin felt like 50 miles. Jake's legs burned from fighting through the snow, and the wind kept trying to knock him off balance. But he kept going, step by step, until he finally reached his front door. Getting the door open while carrying someone was tricky, but Jake managed it. The warm air from inside hit them both like a wave, and Jake felt the woman stir slightly in his arms. He carried her straight to the couch near the fireplace and set her down gently. The woman was shivering so hard the whole couch was shaking. Her skin was pale, almost gray, and her breathing was shallow. Jake had learned about hypothermia during his construction days. People got caught in bad weather all the time on job sites, and knowing how to help them could save their lives. The first rule was to get them warm, but you had to do it gradually or you could cause more problems. "I need to get you out of these wet clothes," Jake said, though he wasn't sure if the woman could understand him. "I'm going to be very respectful about this, okay? I'm just trying to help." He helped her sit up and carefully removed her snow-covered jacket and boots. Her jeans were soaked through, and her sweater was damp with melted snow. Jake grabbed some of his own dry clothes from his bedroom, sweatpants, a warm sweater, and thick socks. "Can you change into these?" he asked. "Or do you need help?" The woman nodded weakly and took the clothes with shaking hands. Jake stepped into the kitchen to give her privacy and put the kettle on for tea. He could hear her struggling with the wet clothes, but she seemed to be managing. When the kettle whistled, Jake made 2 cups of hot tea with plenty of sugar. Sugar was good for people with hypothermia, he remembered. It gave their bodies fuel to generate heat. "How are you doing over there?" he called out. "Better," came a weak voice from the living room. "Thank you." Jake came back with the tea and found the woman wrapped in one of his heavy blankets, wearing his oversized clothes. She looked small and fragile, but there was more color in her cheeks now. "Here, drink this," Jake said, handing her a mug. "It'll help warm you up from the inside." The woman wrapped her hands around the hot mug and took a careful sip. Jake noticed. Her hands were still shaking, but not as badly as before. "I'm Jake," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "And you're a mail carrier who got caught in a very bad storm?" The woman managed a weak smile. "Maya," she said. "And yes, this definitely wasn't in the weather forecast." Jake looked out the window at the storm still raging outside. "How did you end up out there? The roads are completely impassable." Maya explained about covering the mountain route, about her truck sliding off the road, about trying to make her deliveries on foot. As she talked, Jake found himself impressed by her determination. Most people would have stayed with their vehicle and waited for help. This woman had risked her life to do her job. "You could have died out there," Jake said quietly. Maya nodded. "I know, I thought I was going to." She looked at him with grateful eyes. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for helping me." Jake felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. A sense of purpose, of being needed. For 2 years, he'd been perfectly content living alone, avoiding people and their problems. But sitting here with this brave, stubborn woman who'd nearly frozen to death trying to deliver Christmas packages, Jake realized how much he'd missed feeling useful. "The storm's getting worse," he said, listening to the wind howl outside. "You're going to have to stay here tonight, maybe longer." Maya looked worried. "I have deliveries to make. People are counting on me." "Those deliveries will have to wait," Jake said firmly. "Right now, the most important thing is making sure you don't freeze to death." As if to prove his point, the lights flickered as a strong gust of wind shook the cabin. Maya pulled the blanket tighter around herself and took another sip of tea. "I guess I don't have much choice," she said. Jake got up to add another log to the fire. "Don't worry," he said. "We'll figure out how to get your deliveries done. But first, let's focus on getting you completely warmed up." Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the small cabin, two strangers were beginning to discover that sometimes the worst situations can lead to the most unexpected friendships. 2 hours later, Maya was finally starting to feel human again. The violent shivering had stopped, and she could actually hold her teacup without her hands shaking. Jake had been checking on her every few minutes, bringing her more blankets, refilling her tea, and making sure the fire stayed strong. He was being incredibly kind, but Maya could tell he was also being very careful to give her space. He stayed on the other side of the room, spoke softly, and always asked before doing anything. It was clear he understood how vulnerable and scared she must be feeling. "How are your toes?" Jake asked from his spot in the armchair. "Any numbness or tingling?" Maya wiggled her toes inside the thick wool socks he'd given her. "They're fine. Still cold, but I can feel them moving." "That's good. Frostbite usually starts with the fingers and toes." Jake added another log to the fire, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. "I learned that working construction. We had a guy get caught in a blizzard once, and by the time we found him, he'd lost 2 toes. Maya shuddered, and not from the cold this time. "I really could have died out there, couldn't I?" Jake nodded seriously. "Yeah, you could have. Hypothermia doesn't mess around, especially in conditions like this." He gestured toward the window, where snow was still piling up against the glass. "What made you decide to leave your truck?" Maya explained about the packages, about Mrs. Henderson's heart medication and Mr. Peterson's loneliness. As she talked, she watched Jake's face. Most people would think she was crazy for risking her life over mail delivery, but Jake just listened and nodded. "Those people are lucky to have someone who cares that much," he said when she finished. "Not many postal workers would have done what you did." "I just couldn't sit there knowing they were waiting," Maya said. "Mrs. Henderson is 87 years old, and she lives alone. If she doesn't get her medication, She trailed off, not wanting to finish that thought. Jake leaned forward in his chair. Tell me about your route. How many deliveries were you trying to make? Maya pulled her backpack over and showed him the remaining packages. 3 more stops. The Hendersons live about 2 miles north of here. The Johnsons are maybe 3 miles east, and Mr. Peterson, she consulted her route map. He's the farthest, about 4 miles northwest. I know all of them, Jake said, surprising her. The Hendersons are good people. Bill Henderson helped my grandfather build this chimney back in the day. The Johnsons moved up here about 5 years ago from Denver. And old Pete Peterson, he's been living in these mountains longer than anyone. You know them? Maya asked. But I thought you said you liked living alone. Jake looked a little embarrassed. I do like being alone. But that doesn't mean I'm antisocial. Sometimes people need help with things. Heavy lifting, fixing a roof, clearing fallen trees from their driveways. I help out when I can. Maya smiled for the first time since the rescue. So you're not as much of a hermit as you pretend to be. I guess not, Jake admitted. I just got tired of dealing with people's drama all the time. Up here, when someone needs help, it's usually real help, not just someone complaining about their problems. The wind outside picked up again, rattling the windows and making the cabin creak. Maya pulled the blanket tighter around herself. It sounds like it's getting worse out there. Jake got up and looked out the window. The snow was so thick he could barely see his woodpile, which was only about 20 feet from the cabin. Yeah, this is turning into a real blizzard. We're not going anywhere tonight, that's for sure. Maya felt a flash of panic. But the packages will have to wait until tomorrow, Jake said firmly. Maybe the day after, depending on how long this storm lasts. Maya, you almost died tonight. Those packages aren't worth your life. She knew he was right, but it was hard to accept. I've never missed a delivery before. Not once in 3 years. There's a first time for everything, Jake said. And I'm pretty sure getting caught in the worst blizzard in 5 years counts as a good excuse. Maya's stomach chose that moment to growl loudly. She realized she hadn't eaten anything since a quick sandwich at lunch, which felt like a lifetime. Hungry? Jake asked, smiling. I was just thinking about making some dinner. I'm not much of a cook, but I make a decent grilled cheese sandwich. That sounds amazing, Maya said. Can I help? You should stay by the fire and keep warming up. I've got it handled. Jake disappeared into the kitchen, and Maya could hear him moving around, opening cabinets and clattering pans. She looked around the cabin while he cooked. It was simple but comfortable. Everything looked handmade. The wooden furniture, the shelves, even the coffee table. The walls were covered with old photographs, most of them showing the same older man in various outdoor settings. Is that your grandfather? Maya called out, pointing to the photos. Yeah, Jake replied from the kitchen. He bought this land in 1962 and built the cabin himself. Lived here until he was 92. He looks like he was a tough guy. He was. Worked as a park ranger for 30 years, then spent his retirement hunting and fishing. He taught me everything I know about living in the mountains. The smell of grilled cheese and tomato soup filled the cabin, making Maya's stomach growl again. A few minutes later, Jake appeared with 2 plates and 2 bowls on a wooden tray. 5-star dining, he said with a grin, setting the tray on the coffee table. Sorry, I don't have anything fancier. Are you kidding? This is perfect. Maya took a bite of the sandwich. It was crispy on the outside and perfectly melted on the inside. This is exactly what I needed. They ate in comfortable silence while listening to the storm outside. Maya found herself studying Jake when he wasn't looking. He was probably in his mid-30s, with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. His hair was a little messy, and he had the beginning of a beard, like someone who didn't worry much about appearances. Can I ask you something? Maya said as she finished her soup. Sure. Why did you really move up here? I mean, I get wanting to be alone after a divorce, but this is pretty extreme. Jake was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. My ex-wife used to say I cared more about strangers than I did about her. She said I was always helping other people with their problems instead of focusing on our problems. Were you? Maybe, I don't know. Jake shrugged. I worked construction, and I was always the guy who'd help a coworker move, or fix someone's car, or lend money to someone who was struggling. Lisa said it was because I was trying to be everyone's hero instead of just being her husband. Maya considered this. Maybe you were both right. Maybe you do like helping people, and maybe she needed more attention. Probably, Jake looked at her. What about you? Ever been married? No, I was engaged once, but it didn't work out. He wanted me to quit my job and move to California with him. I wanted to stay here and take care of my mom. So you chose your mom over him? I chose doing what felt right over doing what was easy. Maya set down her empty bowl. My mom raised me by herself after my dad died. She worked 2 jobs to put me through school. When she got sick, there was no question about what I was going to do. Jake nodded approvingly. Family comes first, exactly. David didn't understand that. He said I was choosing my past over our future. Sounds like you dodged a bullet there, Maya laughed. That's what my mom said. She never liked him anyway. As the evening wore on, they kept talking. Jake told her about his work assessing timber, about the wildlife he saw in the forests, about the peace he'd found in the mountains. Maya talked about her postal route, about the elderly customers who brightened up when she delivered their mail, about her dreams of maybe becoming a teacher someday when her mom was better. You'd be a good teacher, Jake said. You've got patience and you care about people. How do you know I have patience? You're sitting here having a pleasant conversation with a guy who rescued you from a blizzard instead of freaking out about being stuck in a stranger's cabin. That takes patience. Maya realized he was right. A few hours ago, she'd been terrified and half frozen. Now she felt safe and comfortable, like she was talking to an old friend instead of someone she'd just met. You know what's funny? She said. I was dreading this route assignment. I thought it was going to be the worst day ever. And now? Maya looked around the warm cabin at the man who'd saved her life and was now sharing his dinner with her at the fire crackling peacefully in the hearth. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside, everything felt calm and right. Now I'm thinking maybe getting lost was exactly what I needed. Maya woke up to the sound of complete silence. After hours of listening to howling wind and rattling windows, the quiet was almost startling. She opened her eyes and found herself on Jake's couch, wrapped in 3 thick blankets. Sunlight was streaming through the windows, making the snow outside sparkle like diamonds. Jake was already awake, standing at the window with a cup of coffee in his hands. He was wearing a heavy flannel shirt and jeans, and his hair was damp like he'd just gotten out of the shower. Good morning, he said when he noticed she was awake. The storm finally stopped about an hour ago. Maya sat up, still wrapped in the blankets. What time is it? Almost 9. I figured you needed the sleep. Jake walked over and handed her a steaming mug. Coffee? Maya accepted the mug gratefully. The coffee was strong and hot, exactly what she needed. How does it look out there? Well, the good news is the snow stopped. The bad news is we got about 2 feet of fresh powder on top of what was already there. Jake sat down in his chair. Your truck is completely buried. I can barely see the top of it from here. Maya's heart sank. So I'm still stuck. We're both stuck, as far as regular vehicles go. But I've got a snowmobile in the shed, and I know these mountains like the back of my hand. Jake took a sip of his coffee. If you're still determined to make those deliveries, I can help you do it. Maya looked at him in surprise. You do that? But I thought you liked being alone. I do, but I also know what it's like when people depend on you. Jake stood up and walked back to the window. Besides, Mrs. Henderson really does need her medication, and it's almost Christmas. People shouldn't have to worry about their packages when they're already dealing with all this snow. Maya felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. That's really kind of you. It's practical, Jake said, but Maya could tell he was trying to downplay his kindness. I know where all these places are. It'll be faster and safer if I help. After breakfast, Jake led Maya out to his shed. The snow was indeed incredibly deep, coming up almost to her waist in some places. Jake had to use a shovel to clear a path. From the cabin to the small outbuilding behind it, inside the shed was a red snowmobile that looked well maintained despite being several years old. Jake also had skis, snowshoes, a small trailer that could be attached to the snowmobile, and various other winter equipment. My grandfather was big into winter sports, Jake explained, patting the snowmobile. He used to take this thing all over the mountains. I've kept it running in his memory. Jake showed Maya how to ride behind him, where to hold on, and how to lean into turns. The most important thing is to move with me, not against me, he said. If you try to fight the motion, we'll both end up in a snowbank. Maya felt a little nervous as she climbed onto the back of the snowmobile behind Jake. She'd never ridden on one before, and the idea of racing through the forest at high speed seemed dangerous. But when Jake started the engine and they began moving, she was surprised by how smooth and controlled it felt. They started toward the Henderson place first, since Mrs. Henderson's heart medication was the most urgent delivery. The snowmobile cut through the fresh powder easily, and Jake navigated between trees and around obstacles like he'd been doing it his whole life. The landscape was absolutely beautiful. Everything was covered in pristine white snow, and the sun made it all sparkle. Maya found herself relaxing and actually enjoying the ride. Despite the circumstances, the Henderson cabin was a small, neat place with smoke rising from the chimney. Jake pulled up to the front porch and helped Maya climb off the snowmobile. "Bill!" "Catherine," Jake called out as he knocked on the door. "It's Jake Mitchell. I've got your mail carrier with me." The door opened to reveal an elderly man with a white beard and kind eyes. His face lit up when he saw Jake. "Jake, what are you doing out in this weather?" Then he noticed Maya. "And who's this young lady?" Maya introduced herself and explained about getting caught in the storm. Mrs. Henderson appeared behind her husband, a small woman with silver hair and worried eyes. "Oh my goodness, you poor dear," she said. Come in. You must be frozen. We can't stay long," Jake said. "But Maya has your medication, Mrs. Henderson." Maya handed over the package, and Mrs. Henderson's relief was obvious. "Thank you so much. I was getting worried. I only have 2 pills left." The road should be clear in a few days," Jake said. "But if you need anything before then, you know where to find me." What struck Maya was how genuinely happy the Hendersons seemed to see Jake. They asked about his winter preparations, invited him for Christmas dinner, and treated him like family. This wasn't the behavior of people dealing with an antisocial hermit. This was how people acted around someone they cared about. Their next stop was the Johnson family. Their cabin was larger and more modern, with solar panels on the roof and a big deck overlooking the valley. A man in his 40s came out to meet them, followed by a woman and 2 young children. "Jake," the man called out. "I was wondering if you were weathering the storm okay." "I'm fine, Tom. This is Maya. She's the mail carrier who got caught in the blizzard last night." The woman, who introduced herself as Linda, immediately started fussing over Maya. "You spent the night in that storm? You could have died." "Jake saved my life," Maya said simply. The package for the Johnsons turned out to be a Christmas present for their daughter from her grandparents in Denver. The little girl, who couldn't have been more than 6, jumped up and down with excitement when she saw the package. "Can I open it now, Mommy, please?" "It's supposed to wait until Christmas," Linda said, but she was smiling. "Maybe just this once," Tom said. "After everything Maya went through to bring it here." Maya watched as the little girl tore open the package to reveal a beautiful handmade doll. The joy on her face made every minute of Maya's scary journey worth it. "Jake helped me build that deck last summer," Tom told Maya as they prepared to leave. "Wouldn't take any payment for it," said Neighbors Help Neighbors. Their final stop was Mr. Peterson's place, the most remote of the 3 cabins. The ride there took them deep into the forest, following what seemed like barely visible trails. Maya was amazed by Jake's ability to navigate through terrain that all looked the same to her. Mr. Peterson's cabin was the smallest and oldest of the 3. It looked like it had been built decades ago and hadn't been updated much since. An elderly man with a long gray beard came out to greet them, moving slowly with the help of a walking stick. "Jacob," he called out, using Jake's full name. "And, who's this pretty young lady?" Maya noticed that Mr. Peterson seemed genuinely delighted to have visitors. As she handed him his package, he invited them in for coffee and seemed disappointed when Jake said they needed to get back before dark. "Pete lives alone," Jake explained as they rode away. "His closest neighbor is me, and I'm 4 miles away. Sometimes I think the mail carrier is the only person he sees for weeks at a time." "That's so sad," Maya said. "It is, but he chose that life. Some people find peace in solitude. Like you?" Jake didn't answer right away. "I thought I did. But today, seeing how happy everyone was to get their packages, watching that little girl's face when she opened her present, I forgot how good it feels to be part of something bigger than yourself." As they rode back toward Jake's cabin, Maya found herself thinking about what he'd said. She'd always known her job mattered, but she'd never really thought about how much. These people weren't just receiving packages. They were receiving connection, proof that someone in the outside world was thinking about them. And Jake, despite his claims of wanting to be alone, was clearly an important part of this small mountain community. People relied on him, cared about him, and welcomed him like family. "Jake," Maya said as they pulled up to his cabin, "thank you for today. Not just for helping with the deliveries, but for showing me something I'd never seen before." "What's that?" "How much this job really means. Not just delivering packages, but delivering hope and connection and proof that people matter." Jake turned off the snowmobile and helped Maya climb down. "You already knew that. That's why you were willing to walk through a blizzard to make your deliveries." As they walked back to the cabin, Maya realized something had changed. The shy, reserved woman who'd almost frozen to death yesterday was gone. In her place was someone who felt stronger, more confident, and strangely reluctant to return to her old life in town. "The roads should be clear tomorrow," Jake said as they reached his front door. "I can take you back to your truck, and you can get back to your regular route." Maya nodded, but for the first time in her life, going back to normal didn't feel like something to look forward to. It felt like something she might regret. 3 weeks later, Maya found herself taking a longer route to work than necessary. Again, she told herself it was because the mountain road had better scenery. But deep down, she knew the truth. She was hoping to catch a glimpse of Jake's red pickup truck in town. It had been happening more and more often. Jake would appear at the post office with questions about mail delivery schedules, or she'd see him at the hardware store when she was running errands. They'd talk for a few minutes, sharing coffee or discussing the weather, and then go their separate ways. But Maya found herself thinking about those conversations long after they ended. "You've been different lately," her mom said one evening as they sat watching television together. Maya's mother, Rosa, was a sharp woman who didn't miss much even, though she was still recovering from her illness. "Different how?" Maya asked, though she suspected she knew what her mom meant. "Happier. You hum when you're doing dishes now. And you've been taking extra care with your appearance before work?" Rosa muted the TV and turned to face her daughter. "So who is he?" Maya felt her cheeks turn red. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Mia, I raised you. I know when you're thinking about a boy." Rosa smiled. "Tell me about him." So Maya found herself explaining about the storm, about Jake's rescue, about the day they spent delivering packages together. She tried to keep it factual and casual, but her mother's knowing smile told her she wasn't fooling anyone. "He sounds like a good man," Rosa said when Maya finished her story. "He is, but Mom, he lives alone in the mountains for a reason. He's not looking for a relationship. Maybe he wasn't looking before, but sometimes the right person changes everything." Meanwhile, Jake was having similar thoughts as he sat in his cabin, staring at a timber assessment report he'd been trying to finish for 3 days. The work that used to absorb all his attention now felt boring and meaningless. He kept finding excuses to drive into town, telling himself he needed supplies or had business to handle. The truth was, he wanted to see Maya. That evening, Jake made a decision. He picked up his phone and called his sister Rachel for the first time in months. "Jake?" Rachel's voice was surprised. Is everything okay? You never call. I'm fine, I wanted to talk. About what? Did something happen? Jake hesitated. How do you explain to someone that a woman you barely know has turned your entire world upside down? I met someone, he said finally. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Rachel started laughing. I'm sorry, she said. I don't mean to laugh, it's just Jake, you've been living like a monk for 2 years. I was starting to think you'd sworn off women forever. So did I. Jake told Rachel about Maya, about the storm, about how different he'd felt during those 2 days. He explained how seeing her dedication to her job and her care for other people had reminded him of parts of himself he'd forgotten. She sounds wonderful, Rachel said. So what's the problem? The problem is I don't know how to do this anymore. I don't know how to be with someone without messing it up. Jake, you messed up one relationship. That doesn't mean you'll mess up every relationship. Lisa said I cared more about helping strangers than about taking care of her. And maybe Lisa was right, but maybe this Maya is different. Maybe she understands that helping people is part of who you are. The conversation with Rachel gave Jake the courage to make another decision. The next day, he drove to the post office and waited for Maya to finish her route. Jake, Maya said when she saw him sitting in his truck in the parking lot. What are you doing here? I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner sometime, Jake said, his heart pounding. I mean, a real dinner at a restaurant, like a date. Maya's face lit up with a smile that made Jake's nervousness disappear. I'd love to, she said. Their first official date was at Murphy's Diner, the only restaurant in their small town that stayed open past 8 o'clock. It wasn't fancy, but the food was good and the atmosphere was comfortable. They talked for 3 hours, long after they'd finished eating, sharing stories about their childhoods, their dreams, and their fears. I've been thinking about what you said that day, Maya told him as they shared a piece of apple pie. About how good it felt to be part of something bigger than yourself. Yeah? I think I've been so focused on taking care of my mom and doing my job that I forgot about taking care of myself. I forgot about having dreams that were just mine. Jake reached across the table and took her hand. What kind of dreams? I used to want to be a teacher. I even started taking classes at the community college, but when Mom got sick, I had to stop. Maya looked down at their joined hands. Lately, I've been thinking about going back to school. Maybe doing online classes so I can still work and take care of Mom. You should do it, Jake said without hesitation. You'd be an amazing teacher. You think so? I know so. I saw how you were with the Johnson kids that day. You're patient and kind, and you really listen to people. Those are the qualities that make great teachers. Maya squeezed his hand. What about you? Any dreams you gave up? Jake was quiet for a moment. I used to think about starting my own construction company, being my own boss, choosing projects that mattered. But after the divorce, I lost my confidence. It felt safer to just work for myself in the woods. Maybe it's time to think about it again. Maybe. As winter turned to spring, Maya and Jake's relationship deepened. Maya did apply to take online education classes, and Jake started looking into what it would take to get his contractor's license back. They supported each other's dreams while building something beautiful together. Maya began officially requesting the mountain route every chance she got, and Jake started taking on timber jobs that brought him to town more often. They found ways to see each other without completely disrupting their lives. Rosa's health continued to improve, and she made it clear that she approved of Jake. He's good for you, Mia, she told Maya one day after Jake had spent the afternoon fixing their leaky kitchen faucet. He sees the best in you. 1 year later, on the anniversary of the blizzard that brought them together, Jake had a surprise planned. He picked Maya up for what she thought was their regular Saturday evening together, but instead of driving to town, he headed toward the mountains. Where are we going? Maya asked. You'll see. Jake drove to the exact spot where Maya's truck had slid off the road that snowy night. But now, in late December again, everything looked different. The road was clear, the trees were decorated with a light dusting of fresh snow, and the late afternoon sun was painting everything golden. Jake parked the truck and walked around to open Maya's door. Do you remember this place? Of course. This is where everything started? Jake knelt down in the snow, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Maya, a year ago you got lost in a blizzard and changed my whole life. You showed me that helping people and loving someone aren't opposite things. You showed me that I could be part of a community and still be myself. Maya's hands flew to her mouth as tears filled her eyes. I know we both have complicated lives. Jake continued. I know you need to take care of your mom, and I know you have dreams about teaching. I don't want to change any of that. I just want to be part of it. I want to support your dreams and build new ones with you. He opened the box to reveal a simple, beautiful diamond ring. Maya Rodriguez, will you marry me? Through her tears, Maya said yes. 6 months later, they had a small wedding in Jake's backyard, with all their mountain neighbors in attendance. Maya wore her grandmother's dress, and Jake wore the same suit he'd gotten married in before, but this time everything felt completely different. This time he was marrying someone who understood that love didn't mean choosing between caring for others and caring for each other. Maya kept her job with the post office but transferred permanently to the mountain route. She also started her teaching degree and began tutoring local children in the evenings. Jake got his contractor's license and started taking on small projects around the valley, often hiring local young people who needed work. They built a life that honored both their need for independence and their love for each other. Maya moved into the cabin with Jake, but they also bought a small house in town to be closer to Rosa as she got older. On quiet evenings, when they sat by the fire Jake's grandfather had built, Maya would sometimes think about that terrifying night when she thought she might die alone in the snow. Now, surrounded by love and purpose and community, she couldn't imagine her life any other way. Do you ever regret getting lost that night? Jake asked her one evening, almost 2 years after their first meeting. Maya looked around their warm cabin, at the man who'd become her partner in every sense of the word, at the life they'd built together. Getting lost, she said, snuggling closer to him, was the best thing that ever happened to me. Outside, snow began to fall again, but this time Maya wasn't afraid. This time she was exactly where she belonged.